This is a Hope 1032 podcast.
Hello, welcome to Undistracted. I'm your host, Laura Bennett, and this is the podcast where we learn from our guests how to get better at building our lives with intention around our passions, our purpose, and deal with some of the stuff that gets in the way of that. Our guest today isn't an academic, he's not a public figure, he's a local Sydney truckie and former Navyman whose lived experience of professional collapse, personal trauma, and his discovery of Christian faith inspired him to write Mistakes Are Like Fertiliser, a journey into some of history's biggest mishaps and how mistakes can grow us, not break us. Let's welcome Tyson to the show.
When I wrote this book, I was in a really dark period of my time where I almost lost my entire life from the job that I was doing. And in that space, I was doing plant transfers for a trucking company. And it was a perfect opportunity just to kind of unpack a quote that I kind of helped myself with back in 2016, which was, mistakes are like fertilizer. You can allow them to choose to let you grow you or kill you. And so that kind of resonated with me. And funny enough, after that, I got into the agricultural farming industry where I'm currently at now. And it's all about fertilizer. It's all about planting and it's all about seeding. So it kind of, God has a funny way of making it a full circle and bringing you back to the start.
Did you grow up believing that mistakes were something that had that kind of potential, or were they looked on with a little less regard?
No, definitely not. No, with me and failure in my house, it was your identity, right? So if you did something wrong, you're a mistake, you're a failure. It was a very dark childhood that I grew up in. And it wasn't until, I guess, I discovered my faith in Christ that I realized that God doesn't waste pain and the mistakes aren't the end of who we can be, but rather it's what we do with them that really makes the difference. And it's with that kind of perspective I've kind of lived now, choosing to reflect on what has happened and say, all right, what can I learn from this? How can I adapt to this? How can I teach others the same thing so that they can not necessarily avoid it, but maybe they can learn something from it and navigate on a different path?
What were some of the mistakes you felt like you were making? I mean, maybe even as, a young guy, young teenager, what were some of the mistakes you were making that you really thought, maybe I need to be changing something here?
That's a story in itself, but I have died and come back to life. I've had 3 serious car accidents, 2 serious motorbike accidents, and I've almost drowned 5 times. And so I kind of look back in life and be like, well, a lot of those have got to do with stupid choices when you're younger. And if I hadn't have made those mistakes, then I probably wouldn't have a story to share, but also have other lessons to be able to teach others. And it gives you a greater gratitude for life and what it can actually give you when you just take the opportunity to look back and reflect on how life has served you so far.
Yeah, there's a kind of recklessness maybe though, like in that kind of time of life, right? There's a recklessness that is probably comes out of a curiosity, comes out of, wanting to understand how life works. Like there's no way to get around that, I would think, without making some mistakes along the way. No,
definitely. It's inevitable. We all make mistakes, and it doesn't matter who you are, whether you're like the Prime Minister of Australia or whether you're a single mother at home. We all make mistakes, and really just keep coming back to the fact that there's nothing wrong with this mistakes. It's what we do afterwards. And a lot of the time, especially in society, we look down upon the failure of others, or we tend to hide it. And I think that's a lost art that I think we as a culture, as a community, need to look back and say, well, hold on. A lot of the time, failures have actually been the product of success. It's definitely a human thing. And that's why I guess I kind of wrote the book in regards to reflecting back on 15 people throughout history who's made a mistake and what we can actually learn from those things that they've made.
Part of your life as well has involved being in the Navy, signing up to something that there's a lot of discipline involved in that. I would assume there's a level of wanting to train mistakes out of people because you've got a pretty important job. Mistakes can be quite costly. What was the relationship to mistakes within that environment?
Yeah, well, that's a good point because when you're in the Navy, like for me, I was a marine engineer and we were responsible for making the ship go. Now, if the ship broke down, we're the guys that were fixing it and stuff like that. So, yeah, mistakes could be quite costly in regards to that. So there was always that kind of culture of don't make a mistake. And if you have, don't cover it up. And so I'd built my identity from childhood going into a disciplined community and thought that, yeah, I can't stuff up. Like if I stuff up, then, everybody else sees it, everybody else feels it, everybody else is impacted by it. And so when I did eventually make a mistake in the Navy that kind of ended my career, I was gutted and my whole identity came crashing down because I'd built that false expectation that I can be perfect and I can do no wrong.
What was it like when you weren't in the Navy anymore? I mean, being discharged would have felt pretty soul-crushing, I guess.
Yeah, it was, especially, when it's something that you were a part of that you kind of shouldn't have been. And so, yeah, like you come out after 7 years and you're like, what do I do now? Where do I go from now? Like I've built my whole life around this. I've built my whole identity around this. What's for me next? And that's when I kind of built in me this nature just to be like, this isn't it. This may seem like my life is gone, but this isn't it. There's got to be more. How can I navigate my future of uncertainty through all of this?
And that's where it seems like your interest and curiosity into the world of self-help, in looking at these historical figures that have made mistakes, that we've got a lot to learn from, that seems to be where it really took off in a way. What were you trying to find by deep diving into the self-help genre?
Well, a lot of the self-help genres I was exploring was like how-to guides, like the 5 steps to success, or the how to deal with trauma, or make friends and influence people and all that kind of stuff, because I didn't really have that backing as a child. And so I was going on this journey and I was listening all of this stuff, and this one book in particular kind of compelled me to write this book through the hard time I had back 2 years ago, was Ego is Your Enemy by Ryan Halliday. And that really opened my eyes to the idea that these self-help books are great, but a lot of them don't give any application to what you're reading. And so all you're doing is just consuming this knowledge with no kind of avenue and exploring what it is that you consume. And so I decided to go down this path and go, all right, how do I do this differently? How do I help people in knowledge, but also help them in application as well? And so I kind of like, I guess, softly stolen the idea of devotional that we do as Christians and applied that into a secular point of view. And by the end of it, I was like, this actually works. And so my hope is that while it's not a faith-based book, it is written by a Christian author, and in hopes that the non-Christians and Christians alike can read it and really like appreciate and reflect on their own nature and their own values.
Yeah. And I mean, you do say that knowledge doesn't prevent repeated failure, that reflection point that you mentioned, reflection is what's key to preventing the repetition of failure. Why is that the case?
Well, if we were all true to ourselves, if we were to actually sit down and reflect, I don't think we would like the answers that we come up with. And so in order to, instead of being honest with ourselves and looking at the ugliness of it all, we kind of just, I guess, hide or pretend that everything's okay. And therefore it prevents us from growing or moving on with our lives from something that may have happened. That's why it's like really important just to sit and just to reflect and say, hey, listen, okay, this may have been a really silly idea or a really silly mistake, but I'm not going to let it stop me from moving forward. I'm not going to let it define who I am. What can I do to make a positive impact out of something that may have not have been positive in the first place? And that's what I guess we have an issue with humanity. So when I started researching this book and looking into the figures, I've noticed that we're all the same. We're all making the same mistakes. We're all doing the same things. It's just the problem is that the mistakes got a different name, or the person making it is a different name, but we're all doing the same thing. And I'm like, well, hold on. Why is that? Throughout history, throughout cultures, it doesn't matter who you talk to, we all continue to make the same mistake. And I'm like, what's going on here? Why is that? And I feel like the missing piece is that going back and reflecting on other people's lives, reflecting on our own lives and going, okay, they've made this mistake. It looks like I'm heading in that direction. What can I learn from them and apply to my own life?
What were the same mistakes? Like, was it sort of, too much pride or too much ambition, just not enough understanding of, whatever the field may be people were working in? Like, what were some of the things where you're like, they keep doing this thing and I don't know why?
Right. A lot of it's got to do with pride and ego, allowing that to get in the way. A lot of it has to do with the idea of just being new experiences and stuff like that as well. And not having like someone who's there to mentor them or to help guide them in ways. There's a lot of issues as well, like with anger. There's a lot of people with anger commit a lot of mistakes that we were to look back and go, well, hold on. If I wasn't so angry, this and this and this wouldn't have happened. Some of these people, you'll read them and you'll reflect and have a look and go, hold on, that sounds like me. Yet they've got a different name than me. And it's like holding a mirror up. And it's easier to reflect on our own past mistakes when you're holding a mirror up into somebody else's life.
Yeah, and kind of getting over anger, that does require a bit of vulnerability. And you touch on that difficulty and some of the motivations behind why we may embrace anger more so than leaning into vulnerability. You work as a truck driver, you've worked in the Navy, like these are pretty traditionally blokey kind of fields. How have you got yourself to a point, without wanting to generalize, I suppose, but, as a guy, how have you got yourself to a point of being more open to vulnerability and letting go of some of that anger?
A lot of that I give credit to God and my faith and where I'm at in my walk with God, because having experienced a very traumatic childhood and being very angry with men in my life and being uncomfortable in big groups of men, I find it very strange that I go to the Navy and I'm surrounded by men that I can't get away from. And so it's like God's just kind of placing me in these places, in these moments of opportunity to be like, hold on, this is your problem. Let's walk this out together. And so I worked through a lot of stuff in the Navy. Even now as a truck driver, I'm working through a lot of stuff. And a lot of that, has to do with the fact that I have a passion and a desire to see people walk in freedom, to see people have transformation, because I've experienced that for myself. And nothing gives me more joy than seeing people do this. But that actually requires me to be vulnerable. It requires me to be open and expressive and say, hey, listen, I've dealt with some of the stuff that you've dealt with. I've seen some of the stuff that you've seen. And I'm telling you, there is hope, there is freedom, and there is transformation on the other end. Don't give up. It's not the end for you at all. It's never too late to grow.
There is the real reality, though, of trauma that people have to deal with, that you have to work through to different degrees depending what you've faced. How do you deal with the practical realities of that and all of the things that our trauma can make us do, for better or worse? How do you deal with that trauma and also be a little bit gracious to the fact that life experiences can shape us in these really difficult ways?
I guess for me, I look back and I was a bit of a thrill seeker and experience hunter. And whenever I'm approached with someone who may be a little bit difficult or a little bit prickly, I always remember or reflect back on what Jesus did for me. And if Jesus had died for me in the moment I was being abusive, or in the moment I was bashing someone, or in the moment I was doing something, if Jesus had died for me and didn't judge me in that moment, who am I to do the same for somebody else? And so it creates such more of an openness and a gracefulness towards others and say, hey, listen, like I've seen it, I've experienced it. Come, let's have a chat. And it's that eye-opener and that perspective that I find in my walk and the people that I've chat with, that those who have experienced a lot have much more to give once they've recovered from what they've had to go through.
Yeah, there's a fair bit of empathy, I guess.
Yeah, 100%. Just because, you've walked the same walk, and it's harder to relate to people who you haven't walked with to a certain degree. It's funny, like my best mate, he's got a very sheltered Christian upbringing and stuff like that. And we're polar opposites. We try to like share stories and stuff, and he's like, man, I just don't know what level you're on. And I'm just like, man, I just can't relate to you either, but like we're best friends, you know, like we love each other, we're for each other, we pray for each other constantly, but like it's hard to relate to someone who hasn't had a shared experience with you.
Yeah, you got to kind of find other points of commonality, but it's lovely, you know, that you can be friends with people such different backgrounds. But one of the things you've clearly done a lot of work on is breaking some of the patterns, breaking some of the things that were having a negative influence on your life up until the point where, you know, you really started to shift directions. From a day-to-day point of view, how do you make sure you continue to walk down this new path as opposed to reverting to some of those old things?
Yeah, that's a good question. I'm not going to tell you it's going to be easy, because it's definitely not. But it does require a lot of patience and, I guess, obedience. But also, being a father of 3, I always look at life into the future and be like, all right, what kind of life or what kind of reality or world do I want to create for my children? I don't want to be the father that I had when I was a child. And so I do the opposite, and I do everything I can not to be that for my children. My children and my wife are my biggest inspirations, my biggest hope, and to be a better person. A lot of the time it's reading. Surprisingly enough, reading actually gives you a lot of skills and knowledge. I read a lot of scripture, a lot of Bible. I go to church. I seek a community. I ask for advice. I ask for help. Being vulnerable is a really good way of keeping level and continuing on a path of positivity. And I guess accountability. Accountability is huge in my life. Like if you're not accountable to someone, you're quite easily able to slip away and revert back to your old ways. But if you have someone to say, hey, listen, can you help me in this? Like, this is where I'm heading. And if you see that I'm doing something wrong, hey, just pull my head in and say, listen, I'm keeping you accountable. You said you want to do this. Let's keep going. So accountability is huge when it comes to stuff like this.
And now that you are a dad, 3 young kids, there's a real significance, I guess, to what you're going to now pass on to them, your life lessons, your life experience, now shaping the direction they go down the line. What would you like them to know about mistakes maybe and your approach to that now that you didn't have growing up?
I think the biggest thing, and even now I try to teach them, is that it's okay to make a mistake. Don't let it define who you are or shape you. And that failure is only giving up and not continuing on and giving it a go. And it's never too late to grow. Like I always try to teach them if they do something, like my kids are only 6 and 4, and I teach them if they do something like that's not right or if they make a mistake, all right, guys, what can we learn from this? What is it that you can take away from this for next time? So it's just those kind of practical principles in being very intentional in the way that I parent and I teach my kids, something that, I never received when I was a child.
What does it look like to take responsibility for the mistakes that we've made? As a, 4 or 6-year-old, that might look a little bit different to, a grown adult, of course. But that idea of taking responsibility, that features through some of your book as well. What does it look like to take responsibility, to own our mistakes alongside that very Christian message of grace?
Right. So having someone that you're accountable to and you can just come up and say, listen, I stuffed up. Can you pray for me? Can you walk with me and stuff like that? A lot of the time it's just putting your hand up and saying, hey, listen, I'm human. I'm not perfect. Here's something that I've done. Pray for me, or can you support me in this and whatnot? Like just being open and vulnerable and being the first one to put your hand up. If you're not putting your hand up before someone's approaching you, you're probably not being real with yourself.
Now, I feel like these days, so much of our mistakes can be very much on display. We've got social media, we've got, these highlight reels of our lives. When something isn't a highlight and it's broken and we have failed in a way, it's right there for everyone to see. Do you think we almost have a more negative view of failure now? Like culture is less accepting of it because life is meant to look a little bit more glossy? Or are we more willing to embrace the highs and lows of life?
Well, I think there's two sides to that coin. So a lot of the purpose of writing this book was that we are currently living in a world that's fully created for perfection. And so when you see these highlight reels, you see these things that are going on in social media and stuff like that, they never expose or never show you how they got there. They only ever show you the end result. And the end result is always happy, always successful, always, look at me and what I've created and stuff like that. And so a lot of us are, and especially the younger generation, are being confused by that because they're always now comparing themselves with those people on social media and go, well, why isn't my life perfect? I'm doing everything they're doing, but they're not actually seeing like the behind the scenes for all of that stuff. But then also you now have this twist in culture, especially in like Christian culture, where they celebrate failure now. There's people that are like having marital affairs and stuff like that. And then they're being put on the platform and saying, this is what I've done wrong. And, this is what you can change and stuff like that. And they're celebrating failure. And that's not the point as well. It should be like somewhere in the middle and say, hey, listen, this is my life. This is what it's taken to get to that point. I'm not celebrating the failure, but I'm showing you what it took to get there. Being very real, very authentic with who we are. But I guess that's a really hard thing to do on social media because the point of social media is to show how perfect you are.
Yeah, we do almost, as I'm listening to you say that, there is almost a risk, right, that we could glorify failure in the worst ways. Maybe if people become so embracing of like mistakes are okay, failure is great, you can learn from this stuff. Could we become a little bit indulgent to be like, I'm just broken, I'm just stuffing up, but it's so okay because I'm, this is sort of good for me, I guess. Is there like a risk of being too accepting of failure?
Yeah, 100%. I guess it comes back to Scripture, what Jesus says and how he says that come to me, all who are broken and stuff like that. But he says that I love you enough not to leave you there, right? And so that's as I walk in Christians and I guess non-Christians, it's good to hear that while Jesus may love us, he doesn't want to keep us in our broken state. He doesn't want to keep us in our suffering, that he wants the best for us. He wants to help grow us into the idea that he had created us at the beginning. And so when you walk into that glorification period, you tend to forget who God is and the purpose that he has for your life because your main focus is like, oh, look at the things that I've done wrong and what can I get out of it?
Yeah, it's such a pleasure chatting with you, Tyson. I just wonder if you can share with us one habit, one kind of takeaway that you would love for people to start applying when they begin reading this book.
Please, if you've ever made a mistake in your life, do not allow it to define who you are, and it is not going to be the end of you. There is so much more potential and so much more that you can offer to other people. All you have to do is just sit down, have a good reflective look, and say, what can I do instead of being negative, and how can I use this for the purpose of good?
Sometimes it can feel like mistakes are the end of the road, but Tyson, what an encouragement. His book, Mistakes Are Like Fertiliser, is out at the moment. I hope you enjoyed this episode. Of course, make sure you rate it, review it, share it with a friend, and until next time, enjoy living this undistracted life.